Good afternoon. It's nice to have you here. I'm not sure, is this microphone too loud, do you think? I'll hold it away from me a little bit. Oh, that could be. I'll move. Is that a little bit better, maybe? Okay. Well, we've had a little bit of a change of plans. Uh, is that better? That seems better to me. We've had a little bit of a change of plans. Jennifer's had a very close friend who died, and so the funeral was today in Michigan. And so her program about Father's Day will be in a few weeks, and so that's why I was scheduled in July, and so now Jennifer will be taking my place in July at Evensong, which I think you'll find it enjoyable and meaningful then as well. Liz and I've talked. We haven't done a Quaker meeting for several years, I think, for Evensong, and it always seems like a meaningful time. But I'd like to give you just briefly a short introduction to what we're going to be doing, and then we'll go into a time of a silent meeting. You know the old poem, Quaker meeting has begun, no laughing, talking, chewing gum. If you dare to crack a smile, you will have to walk a mile. We're not going to be doing that. But the Quaker meeting, based on silence, speaks to one of the most fundamental things about Quakerism, and that is that there really isn't an external ritual that expresses what true worship would be. The Friends began as a movement out of the English Reformation and saw a lot of the religious things going on at the time and said, we need to do better than this. And so the silent meeting came about as a time of waiting. And so I'd like for you to consider this time, probably the next 20 to 25 minutes, as a time of waiting. And Mary mentioned something a little bit ago about she's afraid that if she closes her eyes, she may fall asleep. In Friends meetings, silent meetings that I've been in, that happens. That's not a bad thing. Waiting in silence to hear the voice of God is one of the fundamental principles of the Quaker meeting. Now, it may turn out that nobody feels any kind of an prompting or anything like that. Those are called leadings, and the Quakers, they call that, they've had a leading. You may feel like you want to just say something out loud, something from your heart, or something that you feel that the Spirit may prompt you to say. Occasionally, friends will find some sort of an inclination maybe to pull out a hymnal and sing a verse or two verses out of a hymn. That's just depends on the way the Spirit moves among us for the next few minutes. I've decided one of the ways that we're going to kind of conduct this meeting, because we're not in a familiar setting for Quaker meetings, silent meetings often run an hour, and often they're silent for an entire hour. Now, there are plenty of times when it's not silent. But often they're silent for an hour. But that's not a discipline that we're quite used to here at Timbercrest as a group. So I've decided to break this up into two main sections. One of the things that the Friends do is they have what are called queries and advices. And it's not in the brethren sense where they send a query on to annual meeting. It's a query that they ask. There's a series of them that they ask every month at their monthly meeting. And these are generally challenges to faith, things to think about. And so what I'll do is I've chosen two queries. They're sets of 3 or 4 questions each The first one I'll ask in just a moment, and we'll just, after the questions are asked, we'll sit in quiet and you can ponder those things. You might be prompted to say something, or you may not be prompted to say something. If you are, just raise your hand or your finger, and I'll bring the microphone to you so everybody can hear it. Um, but then at a quarter after, I'll ask another query. And I've chosen two queries just to give you a little bit of a breadth of uh, the way these queries work. The first one is a more traditional query that they would have at a typical monthly meeting. They range in a broad number of things relating to family and the way the meeting conducts their business and those sorts of things. So I've chosen one query, as I said, that would be very traditional for a typical monthly meeting. The other one then that I'll ask at a quarter after is yearly meetings often come up with special queries relating to pertinent issues. And since this is the week of Juneteenth, I went to the website of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, and they have some queries relating to race and race relations. And so that would be a more contemporary, not as persistent as the regular monthly queries, but it would be something that in the yearly meeting and at some time during the year, the monthly meetings would have thought of those things or pondered those things as well. One of the differences between what we're doing and what the Quakers would do is that at the end of this time of silence, someone would serve as the clerk and make notes of the things that we share. That's not what we're going to be doing today, but then they create minutes and those sorts of things and pass those things around each other, and that we're not going to do that. But I think the experience of being together in the silence, experiencing the presence of God in the silence, is a good thing for us. So the first query comes to us from Ohio Yearly Meeting. And as I said, it's a series of 3 or 4 different questions. And again, this would be very typical of just a every month type of a query that they would ask. So, and it's actually the second query for the year. So here is the query, and we can just after that take a moment and quiet to consider it. Do we cherish a forgiving spirit and strive to walk in love as Christ has loved us? Is each one of us careful for the reputation of others? Are we ever mindful to love our neighbors as we love ourselves? If differences threaten to disrupt harmony between us, is prompt action taken? Let's just contemplate those for a few moments. Our second queries come from the Faith and Practice of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. Do I examine myself for aspects of prejudice that may be buried, including beliefs that seem to justify biases based on race? What am I doing to help overcome the contemporary effects of past and present oppression? How do I or we help to create and maintain a society whose institutions recognize and do away with the inequities rooted in patterns of prejudice and economic convenience? I'll read those again. Do I examine myself for aspects of prejudice that may be buried, including beliefs that seem to justify biases based on race? What am I doing to help overcome the contemporary effects of past and present oppression? How do I or we help to create and maintain a society whose institutions recognize and do away with the inequities rooted in patterns of prejudice and economic convenience? Sometimes I find myself tripping over language that was acceptable when I was growing up that isn't acceptable anymore. And I'll sometimes thoughtlessly refer to people groups in ways that, again, using language from my childhood or teenage years that are less than helpful today. And it doesn't matter my intent to be not to be hurtful. The fact is that often those kinds of words and attitudes are hurtful. And I find, especially sometimes when I watch older television shows, and I think, how could that possibly have been acceptable? And then I look at myself and say, it's how is that still deeply rooted in me?
Yeah, I think we're all aware of differences between what we call races. We know that scientifically there's no such thing as race. We are much more alike than we are different. But we know about differences in incarceration rates, differences in education, differences in wealth. And I read a book recently which helped me understand a little better another way of looking at it. There's really two ways we can look at it. One is, well, there's something wrong with those people. Maybe they're lazy or they didn't pay attention in school. We have a lot of different reasons. Or there's something in our society that still needs to be dealt with. And it's pretty easy to say, well, it's their fault. They must not be doing something right. But I think if we realize that there's no such thing as race, where there is an issue here that I'm not aware of very much because it hasn't affected me. But I'm trying to learn how it might be affecting other people.
I would not be at where I am today if it would not be for some of the love and friendship of my African American friends.
Thank you for sharing this short time together. I've always thought that the silent meeting was one of the best worship experiences I've ever had, and I'm glad that we're practicing it. Hopefully, maybe Liz will be able to do this a little bit more often. The Quaker practice isn't normally to have a benediction. Normally, they shake hands with one another at the end at what is typically called the rise of meeting. So we are at the time for the rise of meeting. And so if you just would like to shake hands with your neighbor, and that will serve as our benediction for the day. Thank you for coming.